one game that I'm really hoping when you dive into it, it looks like the Big 12 has the advantage would be the Fiesta Bowl with Oklahoma State taking on Notre Dame. What are you seeing right there?
What I'm seeing there is both teams have pretty decent offenses and really solid defenses. Oklahoma State especially, their defense is outstanding. I mean, I do yards per drive comparisons compared to what other Power 5 teams do against your Power 5 results. And usually a great defense will hold Power 5 teams to maybe like 80 or 90% of what other Power 5 teams do. You're doing really well if you can do that. Oklahoma State is absurdly holding teams to like 60%. Like it's just crazy. I mean, it's better than I've seen for quite a while. And this Oklahoma State team in almost every position is very much a playoff team caliber. It's just their offensive line is not where it was. They had some guys leave a couple of years ago. I don't really think, and while they were able to plug some gaps with the transfer portal, I don't think they're where they would be had they not had that happen. And, you know, if there's an inflection point where that could turn to Notre Dame is if the Notre Dame D-line can win up front and allow them to take some more conservative looks in coverage the same way Baylor was able to get after Oklahoma State in doing so. But then again, this Notre Dame team has some holes. I don't think they played anybody above 500 over the last 6 games. And even when you isolate it just by sides of the ball and you take the top half of the teams they played in terms of S&P plus rankings on either side of the ball. So like the top 6 offenses you played, how did you do? And compared to the bottom 6 offenses, and same with the defenses. With Oklahoma State, when you do that, their efficiencies relative to what their opponents would otherwise get against Power 5 teams stayed pretty static. They're holding teams to like 60% of what they'd otherwise get, and their offense is getting about 90%, but they're winning field position. So they come out ahead. With Notre Dame, their offense became very pedestrian, actually generated less than what the opposing defenses typically gave up when they were against the top 6 defenses they played. And then they were over 45 yards a drive and just blowing away the weaker defenses. And same thing on the other side of the ball. They were very average on defense against the top 5 offenses they played. I threw out the UVA game because UVA was starting a true freshman quarterback in an air raid, and that kid was nowhere near what the other kid was. So there's no real way to give context for that game. But you look at their defense, they absolutely held down the really bad offenses. But once they went into the good offenses, you know, you're talking high 30s yards per drive average, which is right in line with what those teams were otherwise getting. So, you know, it's been a while since they've played a really good team. And I'm kind of surprised that the playoff committee had Notre Dame as high as they did, because Notre Dame has not beaten a ranked team. Notre Dame, I mean, they beat Purdue, they beat Wisconsin, they beat an 8-4 MAC team, and they lost to Cincinnati. That's their resume. Everybody else is 6-6 or worse, unless I'm forgetting somebody. You know, that leaves a lot of room for Notre Dame to potentially be a lot more vulnerable than the overall stats on their face would imply. But it comes down to, can Oklahoma State block them? And Oklahoma State does a great job of taking calculated risks defensively. But if you can isolate them in man coverage, Oklahoma had some success with it. Iowa State had some success with some glance route RPOs that went for big yardage against them. You know, if you can isolate them and make them pay for some of those man coverages, you can turn a game. And you saw that early in the Baylor game before Shapen got hurt. And part of the second half was Oklahoma State making a lot of good adjustments. But when the kid stinged up, it helps. But also you saw Iowa State in the second half really averaged over half the field on Oklahoma State, which is unheard of. You know, so that one's going to come down to, can Oklahoma State block them, and can Notre Dame make them pay for those man coverages when they do present that opportunity? You know, those are the 2 inflection points in that game that I'm going to be watching for.
A game that I feel like is almost unfair to ask you about because it's like, how do you predict this at this point in time? Would be the Alamo Bowl, Oklahoma and Oregon. Just so much going on with both of the programs there right now. Bob Stoops is going to be coaching in this game. Like, how much can the advanced numbers even tell you about this matchup?
Well, what the advanced numbers can tell you is that both offenses were outstanding throughout the year. And for the most of the year, the defenses struggled. Now, towards the end of the year, Oklahoma started playing a lot better defensively. They got a few guys back, and that seemed to make all the difference. But yeah, this is the quietest matchup I think I've seen in bowl season of preseason top 11 teams I can recall. Oregon's got their wide receivers coach as interim. Oklahoma has brought Bob Stoops off of the Fox broadcast team in order to come in. This one's just really tough to call. The warts, from the teams that you analyze are always bigger in your mind than the ones you haven't studied yet. So I'm probably going to lean Oregon in this just for that reason, mainly because I know Oklahoma defensively. I know Perion Winfrey is out. I think Isaiah Thomas is out. I think Nick Benito's out. And I think Brian Asamoah is out. So if you're looking at the 5 positions probably most involved with stopping the running game, they've lost 4 of them, and now you've got Oregon's high flying offense coming at you. And I mean, Oregon limped into the last part of the year. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Utah, I don't think they want to play Utah again for the next century, but I don't know who Oklahoma has left, and depending on who they actually have on the roster and how a lot of your replacement coaches do, I think just losing that nucleus defensively is going to bite them. I mean, I still have a lot of Big 12 pride, even though they're leaving. It reflects better on us if they win. So I'm definitely pulling for Oklahoma. I'm just worried about that nucleus not being there because I think Oregon has had fewer talent losses overall. I mean, they lost Kayvon Thibodeau. I think they lost a corner, and I think they lost a tackle. But I think you're losing a guy here or there, as opposed to, wow, this entire group's gone.
We were talking before we started recording about how all these bowl matchups for the Big 12 are teams, 7 of the top. If you're taking new and current Big 12, 7 of the top 14 teams talent-wise are going to be bowl opponents for the Big 12 right now. One of those obviously is Clemson. It's a Clemson team that is wildly talented, had a disappointing year. They'll be facing off with Iowa State in Orlando. What about the Clones? How good of a shot do the Clones have here in this game, in light of, speaking of some defensive deficiencies with guys leaving or not playing? Iowa State's going to be dealing with that too.
Yeah, I mean, losing 2 of their 3 safeties, their middle safety, who's heavily involved in run support, and then Kamani King at field safety, who is heavily involved in pass defense for them. That's going to be tough for them to overcome. But at the same time, I think they've got some good depth there. And I mean, if you have to lose somebody, you'd rather lose the guys that are point guard sized as opposed to the guys that are power forward sized. Those guys are a little tougher to replace, and particularly in a scheme like theirs where you're not asking guys to do man coverage nearly as much. This one's going to come down to, can they get Clemson off the field, and can they win in the red zone? The 2 vulnerabilities I see in this, just in the stat sheet, is Clemson's offense has really struggled throughout the year. But in particular, when you're in those situations where you got to convert, once you get them into the red zone, their red zone points per trip, they're only getting about 4.6, which, 5 is average because that's a touchdown and a field goal in 2 trips, and if you're below that, you're not really doing that well. Now, don't get me wrong, Clemson's got outstanding red zone defense, holding teams barely above 3 points, which that's winning defense for them. But when I look at it, Iowa State's a team that keeps you in front of them. They want to make you make a mistake, and they've got physical guys up front that can really disrupt you. And you're going against a Clemson team that, again, on the season against Power 5 teams, you're talking 38% conversions on either 3rd or 4th down. You're not talking about a team that's continually able to stay on the field. And they're not turning it over a whole lot. So it's not like they're just coughing it up, and they are winning field position, but they're below 30 yards per drive. So they're not really moving it all that much. They're not that difficult to get off the field, statistically at least. But they've got some athletes, and they're explosive. They're a team that they're going to present some matchup problems for Iowa State, because matchups with the Cyclones, they got a really good team, but there are some areas, particularly in the secondary and particularly at receiver, where those guys aren't going to be anchoring your 4x100 relay team. So if you can isolate them, that could be a source of big plays for Clemson. And Clemson can get after the quarterback to a big degree, and they can also do a pretty good job of getting you in the backfield for loss. And even though they're not exactly a high-flying offense this year, outside of one game, they've really avoided the tackles for loss, negative plays, and they've done a decent job protecting the quarterback. They just haven't been able to deliver on it.